our Arizona Reserve's point of order.
Amendment to the amendment in the nature of a substitute to H.R. 7187 offered by Ms. Jayapal. Page 2.
Without objection, the amendment will be considered as read. The gentlelady is recognized to explain her amendment.
Mr. Chairman, I'm deeply disappointed. I'm not surprised, but I'm deeply disappointed that my Republican colleagues have brought this harmful bill to a markup to attack the transgender community one more time. The way this bill targets trans people in the name of gender equality is simply insulting. Don't believe for a second that this is about protecting women and girls. My amendment would require a report on the impacts of this bill on all female athletes, since categorical bans on trans women harm all women. That is why women's organizations across the country, including the Women's Sports Foundation, have denounced categorical bans on trans athletes for promoting fear, dangerous stereotypes, unfair scrutiny on high-performing female athletes, and sex discrimination based on misinformation. And just think about this for a second. How are you going to enforce this ban? How do you verify a girl or a woman's, quote, reproductive anatomy? We have already seen horrific sexual abuse against girls and women in sports. If a woman or a young girl, if your daughter doesn't look feminine enough, is she subject to an examination? This is absurd and insulting. Instead of focusing on the real issues that female athletes face, including a lack of financial resources, vulnerability to abuse, and wage gaps, Republicans are instead choosing to appropriate the rhetoric, just the rhetoric, of women's rights to obscure what seems to be a deeply felt hate for gender inclusivity and prejudice against the trans community. Time and time again, Republicans have refused to work with Democrats to work on legislation that would meaningfully protect and support women and girls. Let's just take a quick look at the track record. Last Congress, House Democrats passed the Paycheck Fairness Act to combat gender-based wage discrimination, and one Republican voted for it. We passed the Women's Health Protection Act to protect abortion access twice, and each time not a single Republican voted for it. And now many Republicans won't even stand up to attacks on IVF. Instead of protecting women, Republicans are focused on limiting women's rights and autonomy. They have supported nationwide abortion bans, and now they're trying to ban trans athletes against the guidance of international athletic institutions that have long recognized categorical bans are unnecessary to achieve fairness. Now, I want to be clear, the International Olympic Committee has allowed transgender women to compete in the Olympics since 2003. And since then, only one transgender woman has ever gone to the Olympics. That's right, one. And by the way, she was an alternate. One of the things I want to point out here is that of the estimated 332 million people in the United States that identify as transgender, 1.3 million adults and youth 13 to 17 who identify as transgender. This is a tiny, tiny portion of the population. In fact, it's 0.5% of adults and youth between the ages of 13 and 17, and 1.4% of the entire population. That's what we're spending all this time on with these trans bans. The IOC's own framework on fairness and inclusion states, and this is a quote, "No athlete should be excluded from competition on the exclusive ground of an unverified, alleged, or perceived unfair competitive advantage due to their transgender status." That is why the IOC defers to the governing body of each sport to determine eligibility requirements. And in line with the IOC recommendations, national governing boards have developed policies that allow for the inclusion of trans athletes, recognizing the fact that categorical bans aren't needed to preserve fairness, as no one factor determines an athlete's abilities. All this conversation does is stoke prejudice and embolden people to discriminate. Almost half of transgender people in the United States will attempt suicide at least once in their life, and trans people are over 4 times more likely than cisgender people to experience violent victimization. These bills directly harm some of the most vulnerable people in this country and tell them that they don't belong. I am the proud mother of a trans daughter. every time these bills come up, I ask you to think about what it would be like if your daughter was the one that you were talking about. What would it be like if you were telling your daughter that she does not have the right to be who she is? Every one of you has children. I ask you to please stop targeting our trans community that is already vulnerable, that already faces so many challenges. Why are you doing this? It is a tiny portion of people across the country that identify as trans, and not a single one of them is doing anything to harm you or your family. Stop it. Stop it. We have better things to do in Congress, things that could actually lift people up across this country. Vote yes on my amendment and no on this horrific bill. I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. The chair recognizes the gentlelady from Wyoming.
I think it's very clear why we are doing this bill, and that is to protect women and girls in sports. I do not believe that this amendment is germane to the underlying bill. The very purpose of the bill is to state that these organizations cannot allow men to participate in girls' athletics. If the author of this amendment would like to bring her own standalone bill, I think that that is a more appropriate way to address this, but I do not believe that this amendment is germane to the underlying bill or the purpose of what we're doing.
Mr. Chairman.
Gentlelady yields back. The ranking member is recognized.